Just try to get my good side because I
Right.
got a voice for radio and a face to match.
Right.
Come on down, guys. We're about to get started.
So cool. Slick.
Pull up a chair. Now, have you guys seen the cannon firing?
Yeah. No.
Huh?
The
No?
cannon? Not yet.
Okay, then right after this presentation, you want to follow these guys because that's where they're going to be headed, right down there.
Yeah.
Just to the right of the watchtower where you see that flag is where they do the cannon firing
I
demonstration.
bet.
So let's get started here. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Blacksmith Shop. I'm Greg the Blacksmith, and I'm going to tell you about blacksmithing back in the time of Pedro Menendez, the founder of our city of St. Augustine. Come next month, 456 years ago, the Spanish arrived here in September of 1565. So, let's start at the beginning. Blacksmith. Why is a blacksmith a blacksmith? Well, it's simple, really. I'm not a goldsmith. I wish I were. I'd make more money. I'm not a silversmith. I'm not a coppersmith. I'm not a tinsmith. But all the metal workers that I just named off get their names from the metals that they work with. It's no different for us blacksmiths. Blacksmiths are iron workers. We work with iron and steel. Back in the old days, iron and steel were collectively known as the black metal. Black metal is iron, and blacksmiths are iron workers. So us blacksmiths come in all different colors, but the metal we work with will always be the black metal iron. The smith part comes from the old English word smite, which means to strike or hit. Over the years, smiting gets changed to smithing to describe metal workers who are hammering their raw materials to make things. So smiths are all metal workers, and there were lots of them back in those days. So many that they tended to be highly specialized. Just like modern doctors, there's lots of doctors, but they specialize in different fields of medicine. Here on the frontiers of Florida, they didn't have the luxury of being specialized. They had to do pretty much anything that came up in the course of day-to-day life as folks went about the hard work of building this colony. So if you think about what the colonists were doing, you kind of have an idea of what the blacksmiths would have been doing here. Number one is tools. You can't build a settlement from the ground up with your bare hands. Yes, they did bring tools with them from Spain to build with, but those tools would get damaged, they'd get dull, they need to be repaired, they need to be resharpened. Every now and then new tools would need to be made. We also made hardware. Carpenters can't build houses without nails. They can't put doors on houses without door hinges. So all the metal hardware and fasteners we take for granted nowadays, back in those days were made by hand by the blacksmiths. Last but not least is cooking utensils. They were cooking over fire back then, so blacksmiths made utensils to help them do that. Now, if I told you folks that they had low, medium, and high heat on their stove 455 years ago, you wouldn't believe me, but there he is right there. That little guy right there is called a cooking trammel.
Wow.
And here's how he works. If this were a bed of hot coals and my pot's hanging way up here, I'm on low heat, but if I move the pot down closer to the fire, I just put it on medium. If I move it down closer, now I'm on high and I can bring it up to a boil. So there's high, medium, and low right there at my fingertips, and that's called a trammel.
Wow.
Now to make all this stuff, we need iron and steel. None of that here, but that's not a problem. They brought it with them. We know that on the first trip over, they brought 6 tons of iron and steel with them, 12,000 pounds of raw material for the blacksmiths. There were fewer than 10 blacksmiths in the Menendez expedition to share that 12,000 pounds of metal. That iron and steel would have come rolled out in rods, bars, straps, even sheets of iron, rolled out at mills back in Spain that were powered by water wheels. They didn't have steam power back in those days, but they did have water power. They've been using it for a very long time for grinding grain and other applications. Now, they also brought the tools and equipment. The most valuable piece of equipment to any blacksmith is the fire, called the forge. That's the heart of the shop. That's the key to the operation. What I'm burning in my forge is not coal. It's like there's no iron here, there's no coal here. So they had no coal to burn. They were making and burning wood charcoal for cooking, for heating, and for blacksmithing. Now, wood charcoal in the barbecue grill, that's going to burn hot enough to cook, but it'll never get hot enough to work metal. You need a way to get that fire much, much hotter. That's why we have this big, very efficient air pump back here called the bellows that blows air into the fire, and that air contains oxygen. Since fire needs oxygen to burn, feeding it more and more oxygen is forcing it to burn hotter and hotter, all the way up to a maximum temperature in my forge of 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That is more than hot enough to melt steel. But I don't want to melt it, I just want to get it hot to make it soft so that I can shape it. But how soft does it get? Well, you tell me. That's pretty soft. That's a piece of 1/4-inch steel rod right now. I can wave at you guys with it. Look at that. Because, and it didn't break, did it? Because it's fully soft and malleable. Malleable means it's easy to change its shape from one shape to another. And that's why the plier is so useful to a blacksmith. It allows us to take a hard, strong, tough material like iron and steel and make it soft and easy to shape with our hands. So let's make something here real quick. I'm gonna make a nail, just like the nails they used to build the colony of St. Augustine with. Which means it will be different from our modern day nails. They're round and smooth because they're made in factories by machines. Their nails were square in cross section because they were hammered out by hand with a hammer. I'll show you how that works. First thing you have to do is get that steel up to the right temperature. But I don't have a thermometer. How do I know when the right temperature is? By looking at the color of the metal. The first color it turns is red. When it gets hotter than red, it turns orange. When it gets hotter than orange, it turns yellow, and when it gets hotter than yellow, it turns white. So as the metal's getting lighter and brighter in color, it's getting hotter and softer all the way up to the point where it starts to melt. Knowing that, a blacksmith can look at it and tell, yeah, that's hot enough. Orange hot is fully soft and malleable. So here's why our nails were square. What I just did was flatten two sides. The hammer flattens the top, the anvil flattens the bottom. I did that a 1/4 turn and flattened the other two sides, and now I have a square nail. To put a point on it, I just tap it and turn it, still keeping it square as I stretch it out, tapering it down to a nice sharp point. Now, while this nail is still hot enough and soft enough, I need to decide how long he's going to be by notching it with this cutting tool called the Hardy. I'm going to make just 4 deep cuts. This is called a roll cut. Being careful not to cut it all the way off, simply because while I was talking, it was cooling and rehardening. So now it's far too cold and far too hard for me to put a head on her nail. And what good is a nail with no head on it? You can't hit the nail on the head if there's not a head on the nail. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is to put a head on a nail, all we have to do is hit the nail on the head. Now I know that sounds like I'm talking in riddles, but remember when I was bending that piece of steel a while ago? Well, it not only bends, it also squishes, just like Play-Doh. Just like when you squish a piece of Play-Doh, it's going to move and change shape. So if I squish it right with my hammer, I'm going to pop a head right on that nail, no problem. And first we got to get back up to orange. Volunteer. I think I spotted her right back there on the back row. Yeah. Blue hat. You want to be my volunteer? All right. Well, hang on. Just awesome. Stay right there. Let me get this head on this nail. It won't take long. I'll hit it about 4 good times with my hammer and it'll have a head. Just like that. Now, here's where my volunteer comes in. Grab that. That's not hot, is it? No, it's not hot at all, or I wouldn't hand it to you. I'm not that kind of guy. But you just helped me prove to these folks who were sitting here quietly wondering, how can he hang on to a piece of steel that's 1,000 degrees without getting burnt? Well, it's because iron and steel are poor conductors, so the heat travels very slowly. See that white part right there? That's the heat. I can see him. He can't hide. So I can touch right here, and it's not going to burn me. But if I touch over there, oops, not a good thing, because it would do that. That's all I needed. Thank you for your help. Now, when you get home, tell your friends you grabbed a hold of a piece of 1,000-degree steel. But we did it safely. No worries. But now that nail, it's not a big long piece of metal. So I know the whole thing is hot, and I better not grab that with my fingers. That's why I have my tongs. These are called pickup tongs. I made these tongs. Matter of fact, just a moment ago, I made a new rivet for them because they're about 5 years old and the old rivet had worn out. So yes, blacksmiths not only made things, they spent a lot of time repairing things that had already been made. So here's our nail, guys. Square, just like I said. Yeah. And they work just fine. Yeah.
So
Now, understand what you just saw was a demonstration on how to make a nail. Obviously, that slows things down when I'm describing and explaining what's going on. It did not take that long to make a nail. I can make a nail just like this in under 20 seconds. That would just make for a very, very short demonstration. And I like to get my demonstrations around 10 to 15 minutes. So if I'm just up here hammering, you didn't really learn anything other than, hey, that guy can swing a hammer pretty good. But if I explain it to you and tell you what's going on, then you actually learn how their nails got made. Now, you have about 4.5 minutes before the cannon firing down there. So if you have not seen the cannon firing yet, I suggest you catch this one because the sky is starting to look lumpy, which means they may not be
Man,
able to
that was
fire
so
a 5
cool,
o'clock
Greg.
cannon shot.
thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
by, guys.
That was amazing.
That's cool.
Well, I don't
Very
know about
awesome.
amazing.